You ever notice how the people with the least are usually the first to help? The old biker's voice came rough and low from the shadows beside the gas station ice machine, almost swallowed by the sound of rain hitting the pavement. Naomi Brooks froze mid-step, clutching the crumpled $8 bill in her hand so tightly it nearly tore. The neon lights above the station buzzed weakly, flickering blue across the puddles gathered near the diesel pumps. It was almost 2 a.m., and the North Carolina air carried that damp cold that slipped through cheap jackets and settled deep in your bones. Naomi had just finished her second shift at Mel's Diner, her sneakers soaked through, her shoulders aching from 10 straight hours carrying plates and smiling at customers who barely looked her in the eye. All she wanted was to get back to the motel room she shared with her little brother before his coughing got worse again. The pharmacy down the street stayed open 24 hours, but only barely, and those $8 in her hand were supposed to buy his last emergency inhaler refill until payday. Then she saw him. The biker sat on the curb beside a massive black Harley-Davidson, one boot stretched out into the rainwater, gray beard dripping beneath the dim station light. His leather vest was worn and faded, covered in old patches Naomi recognized from TV documentaries and stories people whispered about in bars. Hell's Angels. Even now, sitting alone in the cold, the man carried the kind of presence that made people instinctively keep their distance. A pickup truck had stopped minutes earlier, taken one look at him, then immediately pulled away. Two college kids walked past pretending not to notice him. The cashier inside the station locked the front door and switched the sign to closed even though the clock still showed another 30 minutes before shutdown. Naomi should have kept walking too. Lord knew she had enough problems already. But something about the way the old biker sat there caught her attention. Not dangerous, not angry, just tired. The kind of tired that settled behind a person's eyes after life had wrung them dry. His knuckles were scraped raw, and one sleeve of his denim shirt looked dark from rainwater and something else Naomi didn't want to think about too hard. The old man looked up slowly when she didn't leave. His pale blue eyes flicked down to the money in her hand before returning to her face. "Kid," he said quietly, almost embarrassed to ask, "you know if they still got coffee in there?" Naomi glanced toward the locked station doors. The cashier inside immediately looked away when their eyes met. She already knew the answer. The biker gave a tired little nod like he expected nothing different. "Figures," he muttered. Naomi looked back down at the wrinkled $8 bill in her palm. She could already picture Isaiah back at the motel, curled beneath that thin blanket, struggling through another night of wheezing because the heater barely worked and the cold always made his breathing worse. Her chest tightened painfully. Then thunder rolled somewhere far across the highway, low and heavy enough to shake the windows of the gas station. Naomi exhaled slowly, shoved the money into her pocket, and walked toward the locked door anyway. The cashier pretended not to see her standing outside the locked glass door. He kept wiping the same coffee stain near the register while the fluorescent lights hummed above his head like tired insects trapped against the ceiling. Naomi knocked softly anyway. Once, then again. Finally, the man sighed hard enough for her to hear through the glass before cracking the door open barely 3 inches. Warm air carrying the smell of burnt coffee and hot dogs rolled into the cold night. "We are closed," he muttered without looking directly at her. Naomi glanced over her shoulder toward the biker still sitting by the Harley. Rain dripped steadily from the chrome handlebars. "Please," she said quietly. "Just one coffee and something hot to eat." The cashier finally looked past her toward the old biker and immediately frowned. "For him." Naomi nodded. The man let out a humorless laugh. "That guy scares off half my customers every time he rolls through here." Naomi reached into her pocket and unfolded the damp $8 bill carefully. The corners were soft from being carried too long. "It is all I have," she said. Something in her voice must have landed differently because the cashier's expression shifted for half a second before hardening again. He opened the door wider with obvious reluctance. 3 minutes, he muttered. Naomi moved quickly through the tiny station store, passing shelves lined with motor oil, stale chips, and dusty candy bars. The coffee machine hissed softly near the back wall. She filled the largest cup they had, added cream and 2 sugars without knowing whether the biker even liked it that way, then grabbed the warmest sandwich from beneath the heat lamp. Turkey and cheese. The total came to $7.42. Naomi stared at the few quarters left in her palm after paying. That was bus fare gone tomorrow morning. She swallowed hard and tucked the change into her pocket anyway. Outside, the rain had softened into a cold mist drifting across the highway under the station lights. Trucks roared by in the distance, their tires hissing against wet asphalt. Naomi approached the biker slowly, clutching the coffee cup with both hands so it would not spill. Up close, the man looked older than she first thought. Late 60s maybe, deep lines carved into his weathered face. His gray beard tangled from rain and road dust. One of his leather gloves had been removed, revealing large, rough hands trembling slightly from the cold. He looked down at the sandwich first, almost confused by it. Then at Naomi. "You bought this for me?" he asked quietly. Naomi handed him the coffee. "You looked freezing." For a second, the old biker just stared at the steam rising from the cup between his hands. The glow from the station lights reflected softly against the faded Hell's Angels patch stitched across his vest. He looked less like a threat now and more like a man carrying too many miles on his shoulders. "Most people see this patch and cross the street," he said after a moment. Naomi shrugged gently. "Most people only look at the outside." The biker let out a slow breath that almost sounded like a laugh. He unwrapped the sandwich carefully, like it had more value than food should. Naomi noticed then that his right wrist was scraped badly beneath the rolled denim sleeve. Nothing severe, but enough to sting in the cold rain. Without thinking, she pulled the thin scarf from around her neck and crouched beside him. "Hold still," she said softly. The biker blinked in surprise as she wrapped the scarf gently around his wrist. Her fingers were cold from the rain. So were his. Neither spoke for a moment. Somewhere down the highway, thunder rolled again beneath the dark Carolina sky. Finally, the old biker looked at her with something Naomi could not quite place. Not pity, not surprise, something heavier. "Kid," he said quietly, "what is your name?" "Naomi." He nodded slowly. "Mine is Grim." Grim held the coffee cup carefully between both hands like he had forgotten what warmth felt like. Steam curled into the cold night air while 18-wheelers thundered past the highway behind them, their headlights flashing across the wet pavement in long silver streaks. Naomi stood there awkwardly beside him, arms folded tightly against the cold now that she had given away her scarf. The old biker noticed immediately. Without a word, he started removing the heavy leather jacket from his shoulders. Naomi shook her head fast. "No, sir. You do not have to do that." Grim ignored her anyway and draped the thick jacket over her shoulders before settling back against the curb. The leather smelled faintly like gasoline, rainwater, and road dust baked under years of summer heat. Strangely, it also smelled safe. Naomi pulled it tighter around herself without meaning to. "You always help strangers?" Grim asked after taking a slow sip of coffee. Naomi stared out toward the empty highway. "Not always." "Then why tonight?" She hesitated. The truth felt embarrassing somehow. "Because people used to help my mama when we had nothing," she admitted quietly. "She used to say hard times are temporary, but the way you treat people stays forever." Grim looked down into the cup for a long moment after that. The station lights buzzed overhead while rainwater dripped steadily from the edge of the awning beside them. Naomi could hear the old Harley ticking softly as the engine cooled. Up close, the motorcycle looked ancient but carefully maintained. The black paint carried scratches and faded chrome scars from thousands of miles on the road. One saddlebag hung slightly crooked, held together by worn leather straps. "Your mama sounds smart," Grim finally said. Naomi smiled faintly. She was. The biker nodded once, understanding more than she said out loud. Silence settled between them again, but it was not uncomfortable. It felt heavy in a different way, honest. Then Grim reached slowly into the inside pocket of his vest and pulled out a small folded photograph. The edges were bent and faded from years of handling. He stared at it quietly before handing it toward Naomi. She looked down carefully. The picture showed a much younger Grim standing beside dozens of bikers outside an old roadside bar somewhere under bright summer sunlight. Everyone in the photo looked loud and alive. Grim himself barely recognizable without the gray beard. "That was taken in 1989, he said softly. "Back when I thought the road never ended." Naomi studied the photograph. "Looks like family." Grim let out a low laugh that carried no humor behind it. "Sometimes closer than family." His eyes drifted back toward the dark highway. "Most of those men are gone now." Naomi did not know what to say to that, so she stayed quiet. People always rushed to fill silence because silence made them nervous. But her mama used to say hurting people often spoke loudest when nobody interrupted them. Grim folded the picture carefully and tucked it away again. Then he glanced toward Naomi with narrowed eyes. You got someone waiting for you at home? The question hit her chest instantly. Naomi nodded. My little brother. Isaiah. How old? 10. Good kid. Naomi smiled softly despite herself. Best person I know. Grim noticed the smile fade almost immediately afterward. Something wrong with him? Naomi hesitated before answering. Asthma. Gets worse when it rains. Grim slowly lowered the coffee cup from his lips. His eyes moved toward the empty pocket where Naomi had shoved the last few quarters after buying his food. Understanding settled over his weathered face piece by piece. That money, he said quietly. It was for him, was it not? Naomi looked down at the wet pavement instead of answering. Grim stared at her for several seconds, stunned into silence deeper than before. Somewhere beyond the gas station, thunder rolled low across the Carolina sky again. Then the old biker whispered something almost too quiet to hear. Lord have mercy. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Rain whispered against the pavement while headlights swept across the gas station in slow silver flashes. Naomi hated when people looked at her with pity. She had spent most of her life learning how to survive without it. But the expression on Grim's face was different. It was not pity. It looked more like regret. Deep, old regret that had been sitting inside a man for years. Grim stared down at the half-finished sandwich in his hands before speaking again. And you still bought food for me. Naomi gave a small shrug like it was nothing. You looked like you needed it more. The biker closed his eyes briefly, shaking his head once beneath the rain. No, he muttered quietly. No, kid. Nobody needs help more than a sick child. Naomi tried to smile, but exhaustion weighed too heavily on her face now. The adrenaline from the long shift was fading, leaving only sore feet and the cold ache spreading through her shoulders. Her phone buzzed suddenly inside her pocket. She pulled it out fast. 3 missed calls from the motel manager. 1 voicemail. Naomi's stomach tightened immediately. She already knew before listening. The rent. Again. Grim watched her expression carefully while she pressed the phone against her ear. The manager's irritated voice crackled through the speaker loud enough for even Grim to hear pieces of it. Miss Brooks, I told you already. You are late again. If payment is not here by morning, you and the boy need to clear out. The message ended with a sharp click. Naomi lowered the phone slowly. Her eyes stayed fixed on the wet pavement while embarrassment burned hot across her face. She hated strangers hearing pieces of her life like that. Grim leaned back against the Harley quietly, studying her in silence. How old are you? He finally asked. 23. Grim let out a slow breath through his nose. 23 years old and carrying the weight of the world already. Naomi forced a faint laugh. Feels more expensive than the world lately. To her surprise, Grim laughed too. A rough, tired sound, but real. It disappeared almost as quickly as it came. Then he reached toward the saddlebag attached to the side of his Harley. Naomi immediately shook her head. No, sir. I do not want money. Grim paused halfway through opening the bag. Did not say I was offering any. He pulled out a small silver thermos instead and unscrewed the cap. Coffee refill. Relax. Naomi exhaled quietly, embarrassed now. Grim poured the steaming coffee carefully into the empty paper cup she had bought him. You got too much pride for someone surviving motel life, he muttered. Naomi wrapped the leather jacket tighter around herself against the wind. Pride is free. Everything else costs money. Grim stared at her for another long second before nodding slowly like she had just said something important. Then the distant sound of motorcycles rolled faintly through the rain somewhere far down the highway. Naomi barely noticed it, but Grim did instantly. His entire posture shifted. Not fear. Awareness. Like a soldier hearing footsteps he recognized. The old biker looked toward the highway lights glowing through the mist. 3 Harleys appeared briefly in the distance before continuing past the exit ramp without stopping. Grim watched them disappear into the dark with unreadable eyes. Friends of yours? Naomi asked softly. Grim stayed quiet for a moment too long. Used to be, he finally answered. Something about the way he said it made Naomi stop asking questions. The rain had nearly stopped now, leaving only the steady drip of water from the gas station roof. Grim finished the last bite of the sandwich slowly before standing for the first time since she met him. He was taller than Naomi expected, broad shoulders despite age. The kind of man who once probably filled every room he entered without trying. But tonight he looked tired more than anything else. He handed the empty coffee cup back carefully. You should get home to your brother. Naomi nodded. Yeah. She started slipping the leather jacket off her shoulders, but Grimm stopped her gently. Keep it till morning. Carolina nights get colder after 3. Naomi hesitated. What about you? Grimm glanced toward the Harley. Kid, he said softly, the road raised me. Cold does not scare me anymore. Then he reached into his vest pocket again, pulled out a folded piece of paper, and scribbled something across it with a thick black pen before handing it to her. Naomi unfolded it slowly beneath the station light. It was just a phone number. No name. Nothing else. If things get worse, Grimm said quietly, call that number. Any hour. Naomi folded the paper carefully and slipped it into her pocket beside the few remaining quarters. She thanked Grimm softly before stepping away from the gas station, awning and back into the cold Carolina night. Behind her, the old Harley rumbled alive with a deep growl that vibrated through the wet pavement. Naomi turned once, just in time, to see Grimm settle onto the motorcycle beneath the flickering neon lights. Rainwater shimmered across the chrome, while his faded Hell's Angels patch caught the glow for half a second. Then he pulled onto the highway and disappeared into the darkness like a ghost swallowed by the storm. Naomi stood there watching long after the taillight vanished. Something about the old biker unsettled her in a way she could not explain. Not fear. More like the strange feeling that two completely different worlds had brushed against each other for one impossible moment. A cold gust of wind snapped her back to reality. Isaiah. Naomi hurried down the sidewalk toward the motel, nearly a mile away, Grimm's oversized leather jacket hanging past her hands as trucks thundered through puddles beside the road. The motel sign buzzed weakly ahead of her. Half the red neon letters burned out, so only VAC and CY glowed against the dark sky. Water dripped steadily from the rusted stair rails leading to the second floor. Naomi climbed them quickly, exhaustion pulling at every step. Before she even reached the door, she heard it. Isaiah coughing. Sharp. Tight. Struggling. Panic hit her chest instantly. Naomi rushed inside the tiny motel room and found her little brother curled beneath 2 thin blankets on the bed nearest the window. The heater rattled loudly but barely pushed out warm air. Isaiah's small chest rose too fast beneath his oversized sweatshirt. Hey, breathe slow for me, Naomi whispered, kneeling beside him immediately. Isaiah tried to smile when he saw her. You are late, he rasped softly between breaths. Naomi brushed damp curls away from his forehead. His skin felt too warm. I know, baby. I am sorry. Her eyes moved automatically toward the empty inhaler sitting on the nightstand beside a cup of water. Empty. Completely empty. Naomi felt guilt slam into her stomach, so hard it almost made her dizzy. $8. 1 sandwich. 1 coffee. 1 choice. Isaiah noticed the look on her face immediately, because children who grow up poor learn to read worry before they learn multiplication. It is okay, he whispered carefully. I feel better than before. Naomi knew he was lying. The cough told her everything. She swallowed hard and forced herself to smile anyway. I'm going to figure it out by morning. Isaiah nodded weakly before another coughing fit bent his small frame forward. Naomi held him gently until it passed. Outside, thunder rolled low again somewhere beyond the motel parking lot. Water tapped softly against the windows while distant sirens echoed down the highway. The room smelled faintly like damp carpet and instant noodles. Naomi sat beside Isaiah until his breathing slowed enough for him to drift into restless sleep. Only then did she finally lean back against the peeling motel wall and close her eyes for one exhausted second. Her body ached everywhere. Her feet burned from standing all day. She still had a breakfast shift at the diner in barely 4 hours. Then her phone buzzed again. Naomi grabbed it fast, praying somehow it was the pharmacy calling with good news. Instead, the screen showed Mel's diner. Her manager. Naomi answered immediately. Hello. Silence crackled for half a second before the irritated voice came through sharp and cold. Do not bother coming in tomorrow. Naomi sat upright instantly. What? Customer filed a complaint tonight. Said. You look distracted and rude. Naomi blinked in disbelief. I worked a double shift. And now you are unemployed. The line went dead. Naomi stared at the phone in stunned silence while the motel heater rattled weakly beside her. Then another sound drifted faintly through the thin motel walls. Motorcycles. Far away for now, but growing louder. Naomi sat frozen on the edge of the motel bed long after the call ended, her phone still pressed against her ear even though the line had already gone silent. The cheap digital clock beside Isaiah's bed glowed 3:17 a.m. in dull red numbers. Outside, rainwater dripped steadily from the motel roof into overflowing puddles below. The sound of distant motorcycles rolled faintly through the darkness again, low and deep like thunder moving across the highway. Isaiah shifted beneath the blankets and coughed softly in his sleep. Naomi immediately leaned forward, brushing her hand gently across his shoulder until his breathing settled again. Then she looked around the tiny motel room with tired, hollow eyes. 2 beds, 1 flickering lamp, a microwave that only worked if you hit the side twice. Their entire life fit inside a space smaller than most people's garages. Her mother's old Bible sat beside the sink near a stack of unpaid bills held down by a chipped coffee mug. Naomi stared at the overdue notices quietly. Rent, medical debt, electricity warnings. Numbers stacked on top of numbers like waves slowly pulling her underwater. She had spent so many years trying not to drown that she forgot what rest even felt like. Her eyes drifted toward the folded paper Grimm had given her earlier. The phone number sat there in thick black ink. Simple, quiet, heavy somehow. Naomi picked it up slowly. Her thumb hovered over her phone screen for several long seconds before she stopped herself. No, she could not do it. She barely knew the man. Besides, pride was the only thing life had not taken from her yet. She folded the paper carefully again and tucked it beneath the Bible instead. Outside, the wind rattled the motel windows harder now. Somewhere nearby, an old neon sign buzzed and popped. The entire building smelled faintly like wet concrete and cigarette smoke drifting through cracked walls. Naomi finally leaned back against the headboard beside Isaiah's bed, exhaustion pressing down on her chest heavier than sleep itself. She remembered her mother once telling her that some nights were designed to test whether kindness survived disappointment. Back then, Naomi did not understand what that meant. Tonight she did, because part of her wanted to regret helping Grimm. Not because the old biker did anything wrong, but because life had punished her immediately afterward. No medicine, no job, no money for rent. Just silence and darkness pressing tighter around her from every direction. Yet somehow, deep down beneath all the fear and exhaustion, she still could not bring herself to wish she had walked past him. That confused her more than anything. Isaiah stirred again and opened his sleepy eyes halfway. Naomi, he whispered weakly. Yeah, baby. You okay? Naomi forced a smile instantly, even though he could barely see her through the dim motel light. Of course. Isaiah studied her face for a moment with the quiet seriousness children sometimes carried when they had seen too much too early in life. Mama used to say bad nights do not stay forever, he murmured before drifting back toward sleep. Naomi felt tears burn behind her eyes immediately. She looked away fast, pressing trembling fingers against her mouth to keep herself quiet. The room fell still except for the weak rattle of the heater and the distant hum of highway traffic outside. Then suddenly another sound cut through the night. Louder this time. Closer. Motorcycles. Not 1 or 2. Dozens. Naomi sat upright slowly. The sound rolled through the motel parking lot like a storm approaching from the dark. Deep engines. Heavy tires against wet pavement. Headlights swept across the thin curtains in bright, moving flashes. One after another. Then another. Isaiah opened his eyes again as the room itself seemed to vibrate softly beneath the growing roar outside. Naomi stood slowly and moved toward the window, her heart beginning to pound for reasons she did not yet understand. And when she carefully pulled the curtain aside, her breath caught. Instantly, the entire motel parking lot was filling with Harleys. Naomi could not move. She stood frozen beside the motel window while motorcycle headlights flooded the parking lot in waves of white and amber light. Engines rumbled low beneath the early morning sky, deep enough to shake the thin motel walls around her. One Harley pulled in, then another, then another. Chrome reflected across the rain-soaked pavement as biker after biker rolled silently into the lot until every parking space was filled. Isaiah slowly sat up in bed behind her, rubbing sleepy eyes. "What is happening?" he whispered. Naomi did not answer because she did not know how to. She counted at least 50 motorcycles already, maybe more, stretching past the cracked ice machine near the office all the way toward the highway entrance. Men and women stepped off their bikes wearing leather cuts covered in faded patches and road-worn denim. Some looked enormous beneath the pale dawn light. Others older, grayer, hardened by years Naomi could not even imagine. Yet nobody shouted. Nobody laughed. The entire parking lot moved with strange, quiet discipline. Then one final Harley rolled slowly through the center of the mall. Black, old, tightened instantly. A knock came at the door seconds later. 3 calm, measured knocks. Isaiah looked nervous now. Naomi forced herself to breathe before opening the door carefully. The cold morning air rushed inside, carrying the smell of rain, gasoline, and coffee drifting from somewhere in the parking lot. Grim stood there beneath the weak motel light beside the taller biker. Up close, Naomi noticed nearly every biker outside was watching silently from below. Grim removed his gloves slowly before speaking. "Morning, kid." Naomi stared at the crowd behind him. "What is all this?" The taller biker looked at her with steady eyes. "Name is Tank," he said. "I run the Carolina chapter." Naomi blinked in confusion. Tank glanced toward Grim briefly before continuing. "Last night this man called every active member within 200 miles. Naomi looked back toward Grim immediately. "Why?" Grim let out a tired breath through his nose. "Because I needed them to see something." Naomi frowned softly. "See what?" Tank's expression shifted then, softer than before. "You." Silence filled the doorway for a second. Naomi honestly thought she misunderstood him. Tank leaned one shoulder against the motel railing and looked out toward the rows of Harleys below. "Most people know Grim as one of the founding writers who helped build this chapter 30 years ago," he said quietly. "Out on the road, people feared him, respected him. Some still do." Grim rolled his eyes slightly at that, but Tank ignored him. "But last night," Tank continued, "a broke 23-year-old girl gave away the last money she had to feed him while everybody else looked away." Naomi immediately shook her head. "It was just coffee and a sandwich." Tank looked directly at her then. "No," he said softly. "It was dignity. There is a difference." Behind him, the entire parking lot stood silent beneath the pale Carolina sunrise, while rainwater shimmered across rows and rows of motorcycles stretching farther than Naomi could see. Then Grim reached into his vest pocket slowly and pulled out something thick. An envelope. Naomi stared at the thick envelope in Grim's weathered hand without taking it. The motel hallway suddenly felt too small for everything happening around her. Rows of motorcycles stretched across the parking lot beneath the pale gray sunrise, while dozens of bikers stood quietly beside them, waiting. Nobody smoked. Nobody joked. The entire place carried the strange silence of a church before prayer. Isaiah stepped closer behind Naomi, clutching the blanket around his thin shoulders as he peeked nervously past the doorway. Grim noticed him immediately. The hard road-worn expression on the old biker's face softened almost instantly. "Morning, little man," he said gently. Isaiah gave a shy nod. Tank glanced toward the boy too, then back at Naomi. "Kids should not be breathing motel mold every night," he muttered under his breath. Naomi finally looked back at the envelope. "I cannot take money from strangers." Grim let out a quiet laugh. "Funny thing about that." He slowly held the envelope out farther. "Last night you already did." Naomi frowned in confusion. Grim tapped the paper lightly with 2 rough fingers. "Open it." Reluctantly, Naomi reached forward and took the envelope. It felt heavier than paper should. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the flap and looked inside. Checks. Multiple checks. Her eyes widened immediately. One covered 6 months of apartment rent at a decent complex across town. Another was made out directly to a pediatric asthma specialist clinic in Charlotte. There was also a folded business card attached to a handwritten note that simply read, "Community College Scholarship Fund approved." Naomi looked up so fast, she nearly dropped everything. "What is this?" Her voice barely came out above a whisper. Tank crossed his arms slowly against the cold morning air. "Last night Grim called us after he left the gas station." Grim looked away toward the motorcycles for a second before speaking quietly. "Told us about a young woman who had every reason to walk away from an old biker in the rain." Naomi shook her head immediately. "I did not do anything special." This time several bikers standing below actually exchanged looks at that. One older woman near the back quietly wiped beneath her eye before pretending she had not. Tank gave a small humorless smile. That is usually how you can tell someone is the real thing. Naomi lowered her eyes toward the checks again, overwhelmed now. I cannot repay this. Grim looked at her carefully for several long seconds. Kid, he said softly, you already did. Silence settled over the motel balcony while the morning sky slowly brightened above the parking lot. Naomi suddenly noticed details she had missed before. One biker carried stuffed animals strapped to the back of his Harley. Another unloaded grocery bags from a saddlebag. Two women near the office were speaking quietly with the motel manager, whose face had gone pale sometime during the last 10 minutes. Then Naomi heard another engine approaching from the highway. A familiar rusty sedan pulled into the lot fast. Her former diner manager stepped out looking irritated until he noticed the sea of motorcycles surrounding the motel. He froze instantly. Every biker nearby slowly turned their heads toward him at the same time. The man swallowed hard and adjusted his cheap tie nervously before forcing a weak smile toward Naomi. Miss Brooks, he called awkwardly. There may have been a misunderstanding about your employment situation. Naomi just stared at him in disbelief. Tank leaned casually against the railing beside her. Funny, he muttered quietly. Respect always shows up late when motorcycles arrive. Grim shot him a warning glance, but Tank only shrugged. The diner manager climbed halfway up the stairs before stopping again under the weight of dozens of silent eyes watching him from below. We would be happy to have you back, he said quickly. Naomi looked at the exhausted motel room behind her, then at Isaiah, standing barefoot beneath the weak yellow light, then back toward the checks in her hands. Finally, she looked at the diner manager again. Her voice stayed calm, soft, certain. No thank you. The man blinked in stunned silence while a few bikers below smiled quietly to themselves. And for the first time in a very long time, Naomi Brooks did not feel small anymore. The motel parking lot slowly changed as morning sunlight broke through the last gray clouds hanging over the Carolina sky. Rainwater shimmered across rows of chrome and black leather while engines cooled with soft metallic clicks in the cold air. Naomi stood silently on the second-floor walkway, holding the envelope against her chest like she still could not believe it was real. Below her, bikers moved calmly through the lot carrying grocery bags, blankets, and small boxes filled with medicine and canned food. Nobody made a show of it. Nobody acted like heroes. They simply helped. Isaiah stood beside Naomi wrapped in the oversized leather jacket Grim had loaned her the night before. The sleeves still hung past his hands, but for the first time in weeks, Naomi noticed color returning to his face. A mobile medical van had arrived less than 20 minutes earlier after one of the bikers made a phone call. Inside, a respiratory therapist sat patiently beside Isaiah, explaining how his new treatment plan would work. Naomi still felt dizzy thinking about it. One act of kindness, one impossible night, and somehow their entire life had shifted before sunrise. Down below, Grim leaned quietly against his Harley watching the parking lot with tired, thoughtful eyes. The morning light softened the deep lines in his face, but Naomi could still see the weight he carried inside him. She slowly walked down the motel stairs toward him while bikers respectfully stepped aside to let her pass. Grim noticed her coming and straightened slightly. Kid, he said softly, how is the little man? Naomi smiled faintly, breathing easier. Grim nodded once like that answer mattered more to him than anything else happening around them. For a moment, they stood there in comfortable silence while wind moved gently through the rows of motorcycles. Then Naomi finally looked up at him. Why did you really do all this? Grim stared out toward the highway for several seconds before answering. Because last night reminded me of the kind of people we used to be. Naomi frowned slightly. Grim gave a small tired smile. People think motorcycle clubs are only noise and trouble. Sometimes maybe they are right. He glanced around the parking lot, where hardened men quietly unloaded groceries for strangers they had never met before. But once upon a time, we took care of people nobody else saw. Naomi looked at the bikers differently after that. Beneath the tattoos and road-worn leather were mechanics, veterans, truck drivers, grandfathers, nurses.